So I'm hoping that this next panel, which has got some really powerful leaders with great insight into how the subnational and business piece of this fits together. And I think it's this concept of we need each other, right? It's in the interplay between subnational government and business that we're really beginning to see great strides forward. And I think one of the things that's really important at these gatherings at the Clean Energy Ministerials is to understand what's working and why, and then look at how that can be then replicated across subnational jurisdictions around the world, or how that can be replicated along supply chains or through sectors of industry or from one sector of industry to another. At Sustainable Energy for All, we're convinced that we are seeing extraordinary things happening in the clean energy transition, but we're not at speed or scale. Lots to celebrate, but we're not where we need to be. And so lifting up what really works and working out how to see that take off is really important. We've heard a lot in the sessions earlier, and we heard from the Vice Premier this morning, we've heard from Governor Brown, what government can do. The clarity of the long-term signal that allows investors to invest, that allows businesses to plan. We've also heard from business leaders, both here and around the world, especially in the last few days, that given enough data and evidence, they're going to plan for that long-term future anyway. And so I think it is in the interplay between the two. What kind of signals does government need to send, whether it's at the national or subnational level, for business to really move and for investors to move with business or even ahead of business? And what does business need to do to push subnational government on even further, and to push national government on even further? In the worst case scenarios we've seen in the past, government sort of standing back a little bit, saying, well, we're not sure that business can really compete, that business will really be able to take an opportunity, or that even the business sees the opportunity. And we've seen business stand back as well and say, well, if only we had a clearer signal, or if we had clearer regulation, then perhaps we could do X, Y, and Z. I think that we're now well and truly into an era of very clear interplay between subnational jurisdictions and national jurisdictions and business, where we're starting to see a race to the top. And I think this panel is really going to hopefully probe into what does it take to build and sustain that race to the top. That competitiveness based on energy productivity, that competitiveness based on being able to secure a long-term supply of renewable energy for you and your supply chain. So I'm not going to take up too much more of your time. I'm really pleased to be able to introduce the panel to you and to ask them if they'll join me on stage. And then I'm going to try and eke out of them their greatest insights and their strongest messages for all of you. So first to welcome onto the stage is Chris Picton. He's the Assistant Minister to the Treasurer for South Australia. He's a Member of Parliament for Corner in the southern suburbs of Adelaide, and is the Assistant Minister, as I just said. Since being appointed in 2016, he's worked with the Treasurer on reforms to reduce red tape for business, improve industry participation, and secure South Australia's energy future. He's also the convener of the South Australia Labor Party's Platform Committee. He's going to be joined by Kalyan Chakravarti, who is the Director General of EPTRI, the Environment Protection Training and Research Institute of the Government of Telangana in India. He has been the Director General of EPTRI, an India-based pollution prevention and environmental protection organisation, since 2015. And before that, he held various positions in the government of Assam and India. He's also been the Deputy Secretary's Industries and the Managing Director of ASCON, which is the Assam Conductors and Tubes, and Director of Assam Electronics. So he brings a very varied background to this issue. And then we're delighted to have Katie Hill with us. Katie is the head of global supplier, the Global Supplier Clean Energy Program at Apple. She leads renewable energy and climate change work and is currently launching a program to convert Apple's product manufacturing worldwide to renewable energy. She spends much of her time building solar and wind farms here in China. She's a TED Fellow and a member of the WRI New Innovators Council. She's got a background in investment and consulting and has looked at this issue from many, many different perspectives. And then finally, I'd like to invite Clay Nesler to join us. He is the Vice President for Global Energy and Sustainability for Johnson Controls. Thank you, Clay. He's responsible for overall energy and sustainability strategy, policy and communications on a global basis. He's a member of Johnson Controls' sustainability leadership team. He joined Johnson Controls in 1983 and has worked his way across a whole series of leadership positions. And he currently serves on Wisconsin's Governor's Task Force on Global Warming, the Executive Committee for the Energy Efficiency Forum in Washington, D.C., and the Advisory Committee for the Climate Registry. So I am going to move from this mic to my comfortable chair in the middle of this panel. And as I do so, what I'd like to do is maybe start off by asking Katie. There's been, in the last panel, we heard sub-regional governments talking about setting standards and putting markers out there. You've set really ambitious environmental targets as Apple. You've joined initiatives like RE100, but you're going further now, so you're going beyond Apple, the company, into the supply chain, and asking them both to be more efficient and around purchasing of renewable energy. I'd be really interested in how you concluded the business case for such a move. Maybe talk a little bit about what the C-suite and boardroom conversation was before you moved in that direction. Thanks, Katie.
Now I'm on? Hear me? Okay. Well, thank you very much for having us here. It is a great privilege to join this conversation. So to, I guess, specifically answer your question of how did Apple come on this journey to decide that investing in procuring heavily in renewable energy was, core to our business. I know if you asked our CEO, Tim Cook, that question, he would tell you because it's the right thing to do, first and foremost. We believe climate change is one of the greatest threats to our world, and we believe that our company and every company has a major role to play in mitigating climate change. And so that's why we set off on the goal to reach 100% renewable as a company. We are 96% renewable today globally, 100% in 24 countries, including many of the countries where we have energy ministers here today and tomorrow. But we probably wouldn't have gotten there nearly as fast, and we wouldn't be able to make the business case to our supply chain if we didn't see a number of other ancillary benefits of moving to renewable energy. And what you will hear from Apple and from many of our peers is that this needs to make not only environmental sense, but it needs to make business sense. So we have seen through many of the deals we've done and now deals that our suppliers have done that you can very clearly save money in energy efficiency. That should be a no-brainer. Then there are opportunities to make positive return investments in both on-site and off-site renewable projects, long-term PPAs that can save money or hedge against future energy prices, the benefits of resiliency with on-site generation, the benefits of mitigating climate change impacts if you're running a global business. And then there is really the acknowledgement that our customers, our shareholders, and our employees expect this of their companies. And if we want to be a leading company in the future, we need to pay attention to that. And now we get to be also the customer that turns around to our suppliers and say, as your customer, we expect this when you make our components and our commodities.
Thanks. Okay, perfect. Can I just follow up? What difference does it make to you, and as you look down your supply chain, to what the state and local governments are doing in the places where your supply chain is operating?
So to give a little more context into why we launched a manufacturing clean energy program less than 2 years ago, while we were moving closer and closer to 100% renewable as a company, we acknowledged that 3/4 of our carbon footprint actually lie in manufacturing, the creation of our hardware. And that doesn't happen within Apple's own facilities. So we really acknowledge that if our suppliers were following the same energy efficiency and renewable energy strategies that we were, that would look quite different, and ultimately the world would look quite different. Now, I think we've made it clear probably already in our work in data centers around the world that we think and look very closely at what the renewable energy options are before we consider putting a new data center in a country or a region. And I think that is going to increasingly also be a part of our supply chain strategies. We want to look at countries and provinces that make renewable energy available and create cost-effective options for large companies. Some of these loads are really enormous, and I think a great example of this that is really relevant in China today. We have a new supplier who we just recently announced is going to be 100% renewable for their Apple production by the end of next year. That company is called Jabil Circuit Inc. They are one of the largest contract manufacturers in the world. It's an American company, but they manufacture for Apple across 7 large facilities in China. It's the largest commitment we've had to date, nearly 1 million megawatt hours a year of energy they use for their Apple manufacturing. And we've been working with them for well over a year, and they have really meticulously worked province by province with local governments in Sichuan, in Jiangsu province, and elsewhere to get special approval to do direct power purchase of wind and solar power in their provinces. And that's really enabled them to now be 67% renewable for their Apple production today and moving very fast to that 100% goal. And we couldn't have gotten there if those provincial governments weren't forward-thinking and didn't acknowledge that if we want to be a manufacturing hub of the future, we need to enable our companies to access renewable energy.
Thanks for that's quite a remarkable achievement, and just shows you the power of certainly of brands and companies as large as Apple, not only in their own data center positioning, but then the way that you're pushing that out through the supply chain. So now the perfect segue is to Kalyan Chakravarti, because Telangana is set to be, if it isn't already, one of the sort of hotspots within India for solar power. And of course there's been an extraordinary sort of wave of news stories coming out of India on solar recently, everything from the drop in price of solar to 4 cents a kilowatt hour, I think, for one of the latest bidded out projects, through to the continued sort of commitments of Piyush Goyal, the minister, and Prime Minister Modi around electric vehicles and the purchasing of renewable energy into the grid. But could you describe what kind of policies Telangana has been implementing and how you've been pushing Telangana forward as a region to choose within India? Well, on clean energy in particular.
Yeah. So, thank you very much for having us here, Rachel. And we basically, Telangana is perhaps the first provincial government in the Indian Federation to have joined up under U2. And Telangana, of course, you can say is also the startup state in the Union of India, because we are the latest state to have been created in India. And we, of course, as Telangana has started, we believe that that the sustainable development goals that have come into force after the Millennium Development Goals really define the way a budget has to be constructed. So we face the task of deconstructing the budget and then reconstructing it in terms of the sustainable development goals. So again, of course, the philosophy, let me again put an emotional sense to the philosophy. As our Mahatma Gandhi, the leader of our leader, which you all know about, said that the world and the nature can take everyone's needs, but cannot like cope with the greeds of the nation. So we really have tried to define each and every, you can say, department of this state, their budgets in terms of the renewables, in terms of what they can do for climate change. Now, having said that, one of the most important things, of course, is the energy requirements of the state. The energy requirements of the state from 2014 to 2019, we estimated will double. So from 50,000 million units, we thought that we estimated that it will go to 1 lakh units, and that would mean a huge requirement in terms of energy production, in terms of distribution, in terms of transmission. So the infrastructure creation is also huge. Now, not just because of the depleting coal reserves, but we also knew that if in order to be sustainable, the way out is either to go for wind energy or to go for solar energy. And in solar, of course, the evacuation, not just creation of the solar panels, but the evacuation is important. The spread of the region is huge. You're aware that the states of India are almost like the nations in Europe. I mean, we are about 35 million. It's huge in not just the area, but also in terms of the sheer number of population. So now coming specifically to the reason as to how Telangana is becoming a hotspot from 2% of our energy, how we ramping it up to about 28% of our energy consumption is, of course, one is in terms of ease of doing business. That's the most important thing I think every government wants, is that when they come and set up something in terms of setting up industries, and they want to have a long-term purchase agreement, they want to know as to what are the troubles that they will face with the government. So we have introduced something called Telangana Pass, in the sense that if an industry comes and sets up a business in the state of Telangana, within a month's time you get all your clearances. In case you don't get the clearances, the industry doesn't suffer, but the government official who is actually delaying it will actually pay a fine. So I think this is the first time our government has said that the accountability of setting up the business and the penalties associated with the delay in the business rest on the government rather than on the entrepreneur. So I think that is one thing. Rest, of course, realizing the importance of energy and the importance of solar energy, because the whole of India falls between in the solar. The exposure to the sun is so high that we really can exploit the solar energy very well, and therefore we have introduced a number of measures, both financial and also in terms of infrastructure. Like we have given tax incentives, tax refunds, stamp duty refunds, land registration, conversion of land, and wheeling charges, all these things, a number of things which I think the business, once they come there, they will know. These are all the things that we have made much more simpler as opposed to any other state, and that's why it's become like, we have become one of the top 5 states in the Union of India, though it's a new state, the top 5 states in the Union of India in terms of solar energy.
So can I ask you a follow-up question? You heard what Katie said about Apple, both for its own account and then within its supply chain, moving to 100% renewable, and they have joined RE100, and if there's any company in the room that hasn't joined RE100, I feel duty-bound to encourage you to do so. Why is it important? Is it important for you as the state of Telangana that companies are making those kinds of commitments? What do you think about sort of commitments from the company side?
The companies, the solar models that the state of Telangana is looking at is, of course, the model where the industries themselves convert themselves into renewables. Big companies, obviously, like Apple can do it. Apple can do more, I feel. I mean, this is a suggestion from my side, is that not only as a company can you actually go in for renewables? But I do believe that you can incentivize your employees too. In the sense, a place like India can go for solar rooftops. Now, it's a distributed kind of providing solar energy, but it requires some capital investment. I mean, a one-term capital investment, but if you look at it long-term, obviously it will be cheaper because you don't have to pay electricity thereafter. So, if the employees can be given that capital incentive, I mean, big companies can give capital incentive, definitely, like, there could be solar rooftops. And big complexes obviously can have solar rooftops. Apple can, of course, I do believe that industries can do a lot more in order to promote 100% becoming renewable and also incentivizing their employees to adopt solar at their homes. And also, we also have in India that there's something called corporate social responsibility. Now, there are huge tracts of land in India. The agriculture today is demanding a lot of energy in terms of irrigation. We tried to convert it into solar pumps. Now, it could really lead to reduction of emissions. Now, the farmers in India would be willing to give their land, or probably you can have, one area which is a solar park which can give, solar energy to really run these pumps. So in the field of irrigation, in terms of corporate social responsibility also, I think that industries can do a lot in terms of bringing solar energy into the field of irrigation and agriculture. So within itself, for its employees, and also as a corporate social responsibility, I think companies have a role to play in promoting renewables.
Thank you very much. So now we're going to flip to another state government. So South Australia, Chris, recognised leader on climate action and on renewables in particular. Got yourselves onto the front pages of newspapers all around the world recently for so doing. You're a signatory to the Under 2 Coalition and currently co-chair to the States and Regions Alliance. So I've got a two-part question really. Why is it important for South Australia to be driving the transition? And then what's it like when you're driving the transition as a state government and maybe the national government's not exactly on the same page?
Excellent. Well, thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you for having us here. As you said, we're a very proud member of the Under 2 group, as well as co-chair of the States and Regions Alliance with the Climate Group, and really appreciate that international work that we're able to do. In answer to the first part of your question, we think it's vitally important that South Australia, as well as everywhere across the whole world, takes action on climate change. But it's a particularly acute issue for us for a few reasons. We don't particularly have a huge issue with the pollution like many cities in the world do. A lot of our air is very clean in South Australia. But we do face a lot of threats from dangerous climate change. So in particular, we have a very arid desert environment taking up much of our state. We have limited water resources, and when we have faced a number of years of significant drought over the last decade, we don't want to see it get worse and worse. We face significant wildfires, bushfires we call them, in South Australia, and all the projections about climate change are that they will get worse and worse. As well as a very large percentage of our population live on the coastline in South Australia. So changes in the height of the ocean are going to impact a lot of South Australians. So all of those reasons are things that we think are very important that we take action now. But of course, there's also opportunities if you're a first mover, and we think there's significant economic opportunities for states like ours in taking that action now and being ahead of the curve. And so we've, over the last sort of decade and a half, set some ambitious targets, and we've been achieving those one by one. Originally, when we started off in taking action on climate change, we had a national government that were not in sync with us. They had not signed the Kyoto Protocol. They were not taking action on climate change. So we had to take a lot of action ourselves. So we introduced our own renewable energy targets. We, as the gentleman from India was saying, we took a lot of action in terms of trying to change the red tape associated with getting wind farms and solar installations approved in South Australia. So a lot of those planning issues we were able to work through very quickly, as well as we brought in incentives for solar, rooftop solar in South Australia. So now in South Australia we have 1 in 4 households have have solar installed on their roofs. So drive over a hill in South Australia, look at the roofs, and there'll be solar panels all across our suburbs in Adelaide. But we also have 1,600 megawatts of wind power in South Australia installed capacity now, which is a very significant proportion. And so we were able to take those actions when the federal government wasn't taking action. We then had a federal national government that was taking actions, and we were able to, because we were leading the way, really drive a lot of that investment into our state. But unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've had a national government in Australia that has not been taking action on climate change. In fact, they've been reversing a lot of actions. So they took away the national carbon price that was in place. That was a very effective means of taking action in an economically sensible way. So now it's becoming more incumbent upon states and territories like ourselves to take action. And we've recently introduced a state energy plan to take more of that control for ourselves and how we now integrate a significant percentage of renewables into the grid. So as at this moment, we almost have 50% of our state generation is renewables in wind and solar. So it's one of the highest percentages in the world after Denmark. So a lot of what we're doing now is the next step of how do we better integrate that and secure the supply. So we're about to embark upon a very large storage project in South Australia, similar to what California's recently done, which is the next wave of this development. And hopefully we can be ahead of the curve on that as well and deliver more economic benefits for South Australia out of that.
So can I ask you about the jobs component of this, both as a first mover, but also, I mean, I currently live in the United States, and after the sort of brouhaha last week with the announcement from the Rose Garden, there was lots of sort of competing statements about where jobs come from in the clean energy transition, and you heard lots of sort of states and cities talking about attracting jobs as being a very important part of why they were sticking with Paris or however they framed it. So, I mean, is being a leader in this important because it creates jobs? Or jobs as an ancillary benefit? I mean, how does that factor into your thinking? And is it actually true? Are you attracting jobs into the state?
Well, I think jobs is vitally important for every government everywhere, and we think that over the action that we've taken on climate change, it's delivered some 4,000 extra jobs in clean technologies in South Australia, and a $7 billion investment that we've seen through those new technologies in South Australia. And we've seen a number of companies starting up in South Australia who are producing solar panels like Tindo Solar, or who are producing storage solutions like Zen Energy. And we think that they've got a lot of growth to come from the work that's underway in South Australia. But it's absolutely right, there are traditional industries and a lot of those very high power consumption industries that we need to be mindful of as well. And how do we transition them into the future to be more energy efficient, because obviously we want to keep those jobs as well happening in South Australia. The other factor I think as well is that we do see in a political context some of the vested interests start to fight back against a lot of these things, and that's definitely what's happening in the United States, and it's happening in Australia as well, where we've seen a lot of the coal industry players start to get involved politically to fight against climate change action because they want to maintain their position. So we had a severe storm in South Australia last year that caused a blackout. There was a lot of hype and campaigning from the coal industry saying, well, we can't go down the renewables path because you have a blackout like South Australia had. Well, we had very huge damage to our electricity grid, which would have been the case if there was coal pumping through our state anyway. So we also had a coal-fired power station. Our last coal-fired power station was privately owned, was uneconomic to run, and they made a business decision to close last year. So we don't have any coal in South Australia now. But we certainly had politicians and some business people saying, well, the government should have stepped in to subsidise that coal-fired power station into the future. How long for, who knows, and how much it would have cost, who knows. But we think that we can actually take steps to not only transition to renewables, but also to use gas, which we have in abundance in South Australia, as a transitional fuel with new cleaner gas technology to make sure that we have a stable grid, but also one that's taking action on climate change.
That's great. And of course, in good adjustment economics, that's normally a role where national government would step in and work with states and regions as you help carry communities through to new skills and new opportunities as economies adjust. So now what I want to do is go back to the private sector, and this time also swivel a little bit away just from renewables and the focus to energy productivity. You heard me mention RE100. Well, it has a sister called EP100. And Johnson Controls, for whom Clay has been a remarkable leader for many years, was one of the first companies to join EP100. EP100 involves a commitment by companies to doubling energy productivity, which is in line very much with the Sustainable Development Goal on energy efficiency. So, my first question to you is, why would you as a company set a goal like that? Why is that important from a company perspective?
Thanks, Rachel. And thanks to the Climate Group for inviting me today, and especially thanks to the Under 2 Coalition. Never been a better time to have subnational governments committed to working together in this area. The reason it's important to make commitments like this is because commitments really work. For 10 years, we have surveyed thousands of organizations in countries all around the world on their investment in energy efficiency, renewable energy, and clean energy technologies. And about 3 years ago, we decided to sift through all that data, doing some data mining, and we searched for what is the one characteristic of organizations that invest more in clean energy technologies. And we found the one factor was commitments they had made. Organizations which had made internal goals and commitments invested much greater than organizations that didn't, and those that made public commitments invested even more. In fact, organizations that had made public commitments to either energy or carbon reduction were twice as likely to invest in energy efficiency and renewable energy the previous year, and were 3 times more likely to invest in clean energy technologies, increase their investment in clean energy technologies the next year. Those are outstanding results. That one factor explained most of the difference in investment. So here's sort of my personal analogy, okay? Around New Year's every year, I make a resolution to lose weight, okay? How do you think that's worked? It's that obvious, isn't it? Yeah, so now, instead of just making a resolution, what if I told my family, my 3 children and my wife, that I was committed to losing weight? Would I be more likely to lose weight? Probably, okay. I haven't necessarily tried that. Now, what if I did the following? What if I tweeted or put on Facebook, or better yet, WeChat? What if I send out a WeChat that said I was going to lose 10 pounds or 6 kilos, and what if I committed to the first day of every month publish my progress? Do you think I'd be more likely? A lot more likely. And that's the analogy here, is that organizations, whether they be subnational governments, whether they be companies, whether they be individuals, that process of making a commitment and sharing the results and being held accountable to those results drives in significantly greater clean energy investments in both energy efficiency and renewables.
So my second question then to you would be, is it important to you that governors or heads of state governments also WeChat on the beginning of every month about where they want to go, right? Or what do you need? What do you need from government to drive energy productivity? Energy productivity is one of those really interesting issues where it's so obvious that that's where the savings are going to be. It's also where a big part of the delivery for a world well below 2 degrees is going to come from. And yet it isn't moving forward with the kind of pace that one would expect when we're at a moment of urgency like this. So what do you need state governments to be doing as the private sector in order to push forward energy productivity?
Great question. One which I knew was coming. So couple things. One, just a little story about our commitment. We started tracking and reporting on our energy productivity improvements in 2002. Kate called it a no-brainer, so I guess we've been brainless since 2002. We set an initial goal of a 25% intensity improvement for 10 years, and we met that goal in 6 years. So we looked for another way to make a public commitment. And we learned about a U.S. Department of Energy program called the Better Buildings, Better Plants Challenge. And what we wanted to do is, rather than just make a public goal, we decided to build on a commitment that was driven by a national government. It was very much aligned with what the federal government goals were at the time with respect to energy improvement. They had made commitments to investing in energy efficiency through energy savings performance contracts. So we aligned our next goal to that, which was a 25% energy intensity improvement over 10 years. This year we met that 25% goal, and we met it in only 7 years. So even though we talk about energy efficiency as being the low-hanging fruit, that fruit grows back very, very quickly. Most of the improvements we have made in our plants around the world, and we have 145 manufacturing plants around the world, we did with a 2 to 3 year payback. So from a financial standpoint, it really has been a no-brainer. What we wanted to do for our next commitment is we wanted it to be global, because these are global issues and challenges, and we wanted it to line up with the Sustainable Development Goals. So doubling the rate of energy efficiency improvement by 2030 is roughly equivalent to a doubling of energy productivity by 2030. We're an industry co-convener for the Sustainable Energy for All Building Efficiency Accelerator, and that's a goal that's wired into all the work we do with cities and with subnational governments. So that's why we chose that particular goal. I think the role of subnational governments in helping business is, like Apple, we have decided that because our greenhouse gas footprint is 5 times larger in our supply chain than it is in our internal operations, if we want to have the maximum impact on the environment, we have to work with our suppliers. So we started a similar program where we work with our small, medium enterprise suppliers. We have tens of thousands of them, and we teach them the processes that we use to improve energy productivity. And we found that our states in the United States and in regions around the world are tremendous resources. Buried inside economic development departments at a subnational level are energy offices, are universities who can help suppliers improve the energy efficiency of their operations. They have goals which can cascade down to the manufacturer. So we found the best partners in working with our supply chain are actually the subnational governments reflecting their goals and their technical assistance. So we see benefit by aligning our activities, that of our suppliers, with national governments and with subnational.
Thanks, Clay. So I've got the evil eye from the organizers, so I'm going to just try to sketch out where I think the sweet spot that each of these leaders has sort of taken a piece of and explained. I think this is really something that we have to hold on to. So we know that it's at the state government and corporate level that there's a very intimate handshake, right? I mean, that's where decisions to locate a business, to invest in a business, to specialize or to cluster or to grow a particular piece of the economy is made. And so we can see that from the corporate side, increasingly, you know, that both in terms of security of supply, of abundant renewable energy, that's a driver for many decisions. That's increasingly important, not just within the four walls of the business, as it were, but through the supply chain. that's an important now driver of business decisions. We've heard that both from Johnson Controls on the productivity side and from Apple where they're making huge strides both on efficiency and on purchasing renewables. And then you've heard from 2 states, from the OECD, from the non-OECD, about what it means for them to compete for long-term investment and businesses that are good for the economy, that are bringing jobs in, and that are going to really drive a vibrant local economy, and that brings you to a very neat handover with the private sector in terms of demanding and setting targets for the kinds of performance that you want within your jurisdiction, and also urging companies to go further and further. So I think that if you can go from Telangana to South Australia, if you can go from Apple to Johnson Controls, and you can think about the sweet spots that can be created between states and regions and global companies, but not just global companies, the local companies that are part of those supply chains and the local companies that are going to become the next global companies. There's something that's really very, very exciting that's beginning to happen here. The question for all of you and for the Under 2 Coalition is, how do we lift that up? How do we understand that? And then how do we help others replicate that? And how do we make this part of the kind of global movement that Governor Brown talked about earlier today? So I think I'm coming in on time. I'm looking to Helen for some positive affirmation, yes. I want to please ask you, a very attentive audience, to help me in thanking Katie Hill, Chris Picton, Mr. Chakravarti and Clay Nesler for their contributions, and to urge them to go further, faster in the future. Thank you.